This is Ogundamisi. Ogundamisi, we've had serious reports coming in from Nigeria with regards to the gubernatorial elections. Thugs attacking voters with knives, bottles. We've had reports of thugs attacking election observer in Enugu. We had reports of thugs attack and drive out political party agents in Benue community, and as well as thugs destroying ballot boxes, chasing away voters in Osun State. Not to talk about the rampant thuggery activities here in Lagos that has disrupted the whole electoral process. Are you surprised by this event, developments?
Not at all. Who are these thugs? The thugs didn't just come out from heaven. If you have a system in place, you have participants, you have people going into politics. So if thugs are chasing people around, someone is sponsoring them, either a candidate or those who have stake in the election. So I think I hear a lot of times that we condemn the Nigerian system and we say everything is not working, but the fact of the matter is Nigerians make up Nigeria. The thugs are Nigerians. Those who sponsor them to go and attack police stations and disrupt people are Nigerians. So until we collectively as a people, decide to do the right thing, INEC's imperfection cannot be separated from the imperfection of the general society, of the person in a polling unit who is allowing someone to trumpet multiple times. So in as much as it's easy to just say everything is going wrong with the system, but we are culpable, So I'm not surprised because politicians are desperate to capture power. With power, you control resources, and in a situation where you are not even accountable to the people, the resources, as soon as you get into office, are at your disposal to be used willy-nilly. So they will do everything to capture power. I also want to question, so I'm always very careful when we're broadcasting to the international community, when we arrogate isolated incidents, no matter how bad they are, to mean it's happening across Nigeria. Say, for example, in the last election, we had voter suppression, particularly in Lagos, in Rivers, largely in southeastern Nigeria, largely in Lagos and southeastern Nigeria, but not a lot in the northern part of the country. But when we have conversations on social media, on international platforms, it's as if the whole Nigeria witnessed voter suppression. This one voter suppression is bad in a democracy, but you also have to look at the nuances and the complexities of the country and not just generalize that once it is happening in a particular part of the country, it means the whole country is engaged in voter suppression. So that is one. And I learned from what happened in Syria, what happened in Iraq, what happened in South Sudan, where conversations are propelled and they get to the point where the country now goes into a conflict where incidents in a particular, even in Ethiopia, they cried the last crisis in Ethiopia, So this is where I just want us to tread carefully, not to generalize, and that is not to say what is happening is good. Voter suppression should not be happening in any part of the country, but we should. Lagos is not Nigeria. This concentration on Lagos, and you isolate what is happening in the southeastern part of the country, you isolate what's happening in Rivers State, is unhelpful. We should speak clearly about injustices across the board wherever it is happening. That is where I have a bit of disagreement when people are having conversations about what is going on in Nigeria. And that is really my stake. It's bad that people are disrupting the election and it shouldn't be happening. I was just speaking generally in terms of conversations we have on people, not any of these participants. When you follow conversations on social media, when you have international reports on CNN, on BBC about Nigeria, these assumptions and references are just, using happenings in a particular section of the country to mean it's happening all across Nigeria. And why I said it needs to be careful is the way Libya was inflamed, where happenings in particular areas are generalized. In Syria, happenings in particular areas are generalized and promoted by warmongers into full-blown conflict. Of course, I know, and I did say, voter suppression in any part of the country is bad. What is happening and is being reported in Lagos is bad. So my reference was just, it wasn't personal to either of the two participants. It's just my general view. I just joined this conversation. I didn't follow the previous conversation, but it's a position I always try to clarify when we're having conversations about Nigeria generally, that we should focus on those areas and separate them. So for example, when they are reporting on happenings in America, there are voter suppressions in particular states during the last election where Black and ethnic minority were told they must provide ID cards. Their polling units were moved far away in Tennessee from, they had to bus them to get there. But when CNN is reporting it, it would particularly concentrate that this is happening in this particular area, but would not discredit the general election. The same thing in Accra, in Ghana. So this is where, while it's very important that we highlight the very horrible practice of voter suppression, intimidation, violence, but we should be also very mindful. And that is my general suggestions when I speak to people. And also it's about consistency in narratives. In the last presidential election, 2 people were beheaded in southeastern Nigeria. Beheading is a serious crime. And the reportage is, unlike Mr. Farotimi did mention, in a particular place a market was born, but there just seems to be this very high interest, of when we're making these conversations, it's just a particular city in itself. And that also fuels the bigotry, that you alluded to, where you ask people from particular sections of the country will be saying, why us? If it's happening in your side and you're not talking about it, why is it always about this particular place? So it's just, that's just the note of caution. Of course, it is unacceptable that in a city as large as Lagos, which is probably the 3rd or 4th highest economy in Africa, that we can't, a dynamic, diverse, that people should not be able to freely go and vote for the candidates of their choice, no matter where they come from. And I think that should be largely condemned. And that is quite unacceptable. I've written several times about what is happening in Lagos. And I think it's not acceptable, but I also think that there's just that large conversation about our country. There are sides of the country where elections are being held. They are held successfully. People are not killing each other. They are going to the polling units. They are going back home and they're getting results. In the last presidential election, in large parts of the country, people were quite pleased about the results of the election, where Labour won, some areas where PDP won, the diversity of votes in the northern part of the country, where the 3 leading parties almost got equal amount of votes. And I think those are positive developments that's happening in our country. But then you now have some parts of the country, ironically, the southern parts, where we seem to be going backward. And the parts of the country we thought they were unschooled, they were malus, as they would say, seems to be practicing democracy in a way that those of us in the southern part of the country thought they weren't able to. So we actually need to speak to the wide desperation in certain parts of the country when it comes to election, that it becomes a conflict situation. It becomes where we are saying some tribes cannot vote in certain areas. And I think those are legitimate questions that need to be probed, really.
How do we heal from all of this animosity and bitterness? I mean, considering the fact that now Nigerians are more than ever disillusioned. And where do we go from here?
So the first, I think I will sound like a broken record with this. I've always maintained, and I think I've been on your program several times, that you cannot heal if you don't have honest conversations. There are some topics we try to avoid as a country. The number one topic is what is Nigeria as a country, you know, the structure of the country. Why is it that everyone is desperate to go to Abuja to become the president of the country, to become a senator, to become a member of House of Reps? Because power is concentrated too much in the hands of a powerful man. So, for example, the president almost determines who gets what in Alimosho, or who gets what in Nkwo, in Anambra State, you know, or who gets what in Argungu, you know. So we need to speak to the question of how power is structured in such a way that the center is too, because if we restructure in a way where we would not, it will not matter who is the president of the country. What will matter is what your councillor is doing in your local government, what your local government chairman is doing with the resources, you know, and I'm speaking about the national question. So we need to speak about the national questions. We have not healed the Biafra questions. We need to have those honest conversations about Biafra, both either on the Nigerian side, either on the Biafran side. We need to now talk about resource control. You know, why should oil be taken from the Niger Delta and then you pump everything into Abuja, and then you now start giving them stipends? You know, we also need to speak about, as NGOs and civil societies, you know, over the years, we no longer hold accountable governors, local government chairman, councillors. Everyone is either talking about Jonathan, or we're speaking about Buhari, or we're speaking about Obasanjo, you know. But when you look at budget, when you look at the other different organizations, it seems activism is just focused on Abuja. And you have a lot of people who get a lot of resources. As we speak today, we still allocate millions of naira to local government, to the state governments, and they escape. In Abia State, you know it, the different governors they've had, successive governors, they've never really accounted for resources to the people, but focus is not on them. So civil society needs to go into the local areas and start calling people out and start making them accountable. You know, in terms of healing, I think we'll first start by having honest, difficult conversations. You know, we have to there should be consequences for bad behavior. Right now in Nigeria, there are no consequences for bad behavior, either by people in government or even by citizens themselves. So, for example, if I want to get a driver's license, you know, and I don't want to go through the official way, you know, I'll be able to do it because, you know, somebody in the office is able to collect bribe, you know, and then people in government know that if they steal money, there are no consequences for their actions, you know. So we also need to tone down the rhetorics in terms of the conversations politicians have. When it comes to hunger does not have tribal marks. You know, poverty does not have tribal marks. What affects the poor man in Ikare affects the poor man in any other parts of the country. You know, and politicians would always promote this issue of ethnic, religious differences during election period. But when they get into power, these same politicians who form opposing blocks get united when they start sharing our resources in the National Assembly. You know, so I think those honest, we have to start by having honest, difficult conversations. There should be nothing like you cannot speak about anything. I should be able to speak about my brothers from the southeastern part of Nigeria. They should be able to speak about their experience in Lagos and other parts of the country. This issue of stigmatizing people. If you have an opinion that doesn't go well with you, you are either a Fulani slave. You know, if the president comes from the northern part of the country, every crime is perpetrated by the Fulani man. Any crime, any kidnapping in any part of the country is the Fulani. If what's his name, Tinubu becomes president now, it will be the turn of the Yorubas to be labeled as the people causing everything that is wrong with Nigeria. So we need to hold people accountable based on the office they hold and not the tribe that they come from. And those who we elect into those offices must be very firm, very fair, when they are using power and resources. My very disagreement with the current government, which I strongly support, I was hoping they would succeed, was the handling of the herdsmen crisis. I didn't think the president was exemplary enough, was fair enough, and he had to let it fester for a while. So we just need to be very honest with ourselves in having those conversations.
All right, thank you too much. Deficiency in the democratic norms and practices, which needs to be addressed. What should Nigeria be expecting to see in the coming weeks? And what impact will all of this have on the future of the Nigerian state?
Okay, so
wait, are you going to accredit
on, irrespective of whatever candidate you support? And that is that the Prof and Mr. Parotimi support, or if you're supporting a Tinubu or a Showore or what have you, there's a general one that is clear that it's not a perfect election. There will be an area of disagreement, where supporters of the APC would see that their candidate has a mandate. Supporters of the APC who voted in the north, who voted in the south, and what have you, would have. So the election will be legitimate to them. And for Prof and Mr. Parotimi, who support the Labour Party, and the election will be illegitimate. But there's only one person, as far as we're only one institution, if we're to follow the rule of law, no matter how imperfect it is, that will determine a legitimate president-elect, and that is the Court of Appeal. I'm not a lawyer, but I think it ends at the Supreme Court. And if we've had cases where elections were overturned in Bayelsa, the APC candidates who won quote-unquote election was overturned and the PDP candidate became the governor. In other parts of the country, we've had cases where elections were overturned. I think we should continue, no matter how imperfect the system is, we should not be tired. We should continue to encourage and put pressure for the system to get to the point where we can surely say this is something Nigerians can have faith in. So Mr. Obi has made the right call. He's going to go to court. He's going to prove that he won the election. And whatever the outcome is, I think we would have to live with the consequences. If the Supreme Court announce the election and call Mr. Obi the president-elect, we will rally around him and support him. If it's the current individual INEC has declared president, while we continue to hold him account, a country needs to be run, and we have to now start holding him accountable to the promises he made to Nigerians. If he's not delivering on those promises, start putting fire on his feet from the one. I do not see a third alternative. The third alternative will be complete civil disobedience. And that is one area I continue. And basically, for some of us who have experienced manage a crisis, that is one area I don't want both the politicians and supporters of politicians to push Nigeria to. So I did not support. My writings were quite clear that my two favorite candidates that should emerge if Nigeria were to turn a page did not emerge in this election. I think this election should have been between Mr. Obi or the PDP and Oshibajo of the APC. That didn't happen. I've come to accept my fate. We've been presented with the current president-elect, and if he's sworn in, if the Supreme Court affirms that he's the president of the country, then we will start dealing with the consequences of that, either for good or for bad. Everything. I'm just hoping that whoever emerges as leaders in all every tiers of government will just be responsible enough to cater for the general needs of our people. There's so much poverty in the land, insecurity, lack of health care, things that directly affect our people day-to-day living, the way of life. The Naira policy, whoever becomes president needs to just do something as soon as possible so that our poor people in the villages will have access to the money and be able to sell their, there are just immediate things beyond conversations about how the system is bad. Somebody is going to be in public office. They need to be accountable to the people from day one. And that does not stop us from still dealing with the issue of their legitimacy. There are urgent, immediate needs that needs to be done by people in government. In Lagos, the deaths across the states, the lack of good roads for our people, the kidnappings. We still have an insurgency in the northern part of the country that is raging. We have the insurgency in southeastern part of Nigeria. These are very serious issues that needs to be looked into. So I am hoping that whoever emerges, would do something about it immediately. And that doesn't stop us from also continuously looking at the issue of the legitimacy of whoever emerges as president, governor, or local government chairman.